Hello everybody, welcome to another video in the series Python for Linguists. Today we are talking about command line arguments. As always, these are videos for coding along, so have your hands free, be in a quiet spot, and make sure that you're actively following all the code examples and dedicating a bit of time to the exercises. It's only going to be one exercise in this video, but it will be more time consuming than just a little snippet. Let's jump into it. Writing code with more flexibility. That's the motto of today's and the next video in this series as well. The core problem that we're tackling here is typically we very often write code that has some core functionality, like counting the frequency of a word, or finding all instances of a word and printing out the concordance lines, etc., right? So we want that code to be there, but we also want to be flexible. We want to be able to execute that with any search term, for example, that we could think of, right? So sometimes we want options. Tell our script what files or directories to interact with, so what data to load. Um, Decide whether it should print or save results. Choose which words or patterns to look for, etc. And to achieve this flexibility, we can use extra command line arguments. And along the way of introducing command line arguments, we'll also transition to writing code in the form of scripts more decidedly, compared to the relatively frequent coding in the live interpreter that we have been doing so far. What does this look like? Command line arguments are really straightforward. When you call Python from the system command line, you type Python, and then what we've been doing so far for executing Python script, Python space, and then the name of a script, or the path to a script, actually. A path that ends in .py, and if it's a valid path, the computer will find a Python script there and then execute it with Python. And that's basically what happens. Except if you don't feed any script to the command line and just type Python, then you immediately are jumping into the live interpreter. But we can always use more than this. We can use additional command line arguments. And for this, we need to have access to an additional Python module. That's the sys module, SYS. So as we have come to know and appreciate, we can simply do import sys. And now we have the sys module installed, and it's a module for system-specific parameters and functions. There's a link to the documentation. We will use it in a highly restricted format, namely exclusively to work with one of its functions, and that's sysargv. And that is simply returns in list format a list of all the command line arguments given to Python. The way Python turns this into a list is splitting at white space. So there's really nothing fancy about it. It reads it in as a string, splits at white space, and then you have the list of individual things. The first thing always needs to be this .py file, but then you can feed it additional stuff. And what can you do with this sort of stuff? Well, in order to do anything with it, you kind of need to work in a script, because you only get into the live interpreter, right, without adding additional command line arguments. Like if you type Python and then maybe something like the word you want to search for, it's going to complain that that word is not the path to a Python script. So this really only works when working with scripts. Here's a simple example of what such a script might look like. So we import the sys module. We also import OS because I want to do a sanity check below whether the argument actually is a valid path to a txt file, which we're doing here. If OS path is file sysargv1, so the second, right, index position 1, the second element in the arguments list. So if that is a valid file path, and also if the second element in the list here ends with .txt. So we want it to be a text file. If that's the case, open it as f, and for line in f, print line. So it really only prints the file that we feed it. It's not doing anything fancy yet. Let's see what this looks like in a script. Nothing at all different from what it looks like on the slides, right? So let's run this script. So we need to find a text file that ends with txt. Let's see if I get this right the first try. All right, here we are. First, let's go to this is where this lives, Python, and then what's the file called? sysargv.py. And then home. Shakespeare. You may have noticed that I'm very erratic with my capitalization, but I'm good with remembering things. I think this should work. Right, this is all it is. Python sysargv.py, and then this path. Let's see if it is a valid path. It is, yeah. So it just prints off all of these lines in Shakespeare. Not super impressive yet, but maybe you can see how this gets more useful when we talk about feeding a script different search terms and then getting results for these search terms, etc. Right? This is kind of what you're going to do in the practice exercise. So based on what you know now about the sysargv method function, write a script that takes as its first command line argument any string. That's kind of duh, because a command line argument is always a string. The script should search for this string and return its frequency, just the raw count, that's totally fine, in the works of William Shakespeare. And if you manage to do this, not a particularly easy task to start with, you can upscale it to work with all of the Brown corpus. And for this, you'll need to process multiple files, right? So this is a refresher also on how to go over multiple files with the OS module. And you need to do all of this in a script, and then you need to execute the script in the command line to see if it works, right? We're at a point with sysargv that doing things in the live interpreter just doesn't really square well with that particular function. That's quite a bit of quite a hefty chunk, this exercise. I'm going to leave it with this one exercise and one additional content slide. This is just about what you can do with it, with command line arguments. And there's quite a lot you can do with them. Just think of them as strings, right? You can feed strings into your program, and those can be file names or directories to read, but also to write to. They can be linguistic items of interest, and there can be more than one of these, right? So you can look at, collocation behavior, etc., etc. They can also be something more abstract, like a parameter to check in an if, elif, else sequence, right? So you could have a basic script that either, I don't know, that either normalizes to one method or another, that looks for relative frequency versus dispersion of items across a corpus, etc., etc. So this parameter could be set with a command line argument as well. What it really allows you to do is to keep your code constant, but allow it to do a lot of different things without having to rewrite the code every time you go into it. And that's really, really valuable. It's good for you because you don't need to go into the code anytime you want to change something. You really can only remember, or only have to remember, the surface level stuff you need to change. And it's extremely good for others. If you ever get to a point where you write code that somebody else needs to execute, you can just tell them, okay, you type in Python and then the name to the file, and then whatever word you want to search. So they don't even need to understand how Python works at all, and they can still work with this. So I hope that'll prove useful. It's always good to reach high, reach for the stars, which is certainly what we're doing in this class. Thank you very much for your attention. Here are the image credits for completeness' sake. And the link to the slides in QR code form, as well as the plain URL. See you for the next video on user input. Bye for now.